Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. That's a Māori greeting. Greetings, greetings, greetings to you all. I'm Samantha Gain, the President of IPWEA New Zealand. We're the New Zealand division or branch of the Institute of Public Works Engineering Australasia. Like CIHT, we're a membership organisation. Our members are people who work in infrastructure and related roles in local authorities, consultancies and contracting companies. We provide thought leadership, produce guidance documents, provide training and have a branch network for networking and learning. Our vision is to be leaders in asset management for sustainable communities. Our focus is on asset management across all categories of infrastructure. We have a strong and long history in the local government sector, so we have tended to focus on roading and water infrastructure, and have also produced guidance relating to buildings and parks. You may be aware of our NAMS work, which is now also in Canada. As part of that, IPWEA produces the IIMM, the International Infrastructure Management Manual. When I met your president, Matthew Lugg, at the American Public Works Association's conference in August last year, I was struck by the similarity of issues we are facing. I was very pleased to accept the invitation to participate in this, your annual conference. I'm sorry not to be able to be there in person and hope you'll be able to understand my Kiwi accent. I promise I'm doing my best to speak slowly. Today, I've been asked to talk about how New Zealand is using transport to improve productivity and lessons from earthquakes, how to make transport systems more resilient. I thought it would also be useful to give a summary of the general context in New Zealand at present, both in terms of the funding and delivery structures for transport, and also from a political and social point of view, particularly with a focus on productivity and resilience. As I begin to talk about the New Zealand transport sector, I just want to remind you that New Zealand is the size of the UK, but we only have the population of about 5 million people. So our population is sparse and spread out, and we have much less money to play with than you do in the UK, given our lower population and taxpayer base. So we have public roads, which are either local roads or state highways. The local roads are owned and managed by local authorities, and the state highways by a Crown entity called the New Zealand Transport Agency, or NZTA. Funding of local roads is shared approximately 50-50 between local ratepayers and the National Land Transport Fund. The NLTF is made up of hypothecated money from petrol taxes and also some general taxpayer base. So it's all public money. State highways are funded entirely out of that National Land Transport Fund. Public transport delivery is the responsibility of regional councils and funded as for local roads, so about half and half between the local ratepayer and the taxpayer and petrol tax through the National Land Transport Fund. Rail infrastructure is owned and managed by a Crown-owned company, KiwiRail, and also receives some central government funding. Ports, on the other hand, are owned and operated by port companies. Port companies are generally have a majority ownership of local authorities, but don't attract any central government funding. They are required to operate as successful businesses and fund their own activities out of that money. Actual delivery of road and rail maintenance and construction, and of public transport, is generally contracted out. Councils and NZTA don't generally have their own workforce. Those agencies have varying degrees of internal engineering and design capability and capacity. Transport policy direction is set by the Ministry of Transport, which also oversees NZTA and KiwiRail. In New Zealand, we had a national-led centre-right government for 9 years up until 2017. That government was very focused on roading and established the Roads of National Significance, or RONS program, to upgrade key state highway routes. The Labour coalition government, a centre-left government, came into power in 2017 and is much more focused on walking, cycling and public transport, and on rail as a mode of moving freight. This change is reflected in the government policy statement on transport, which now emphasises 4 aspects: safety, access, in relation to economic and social opportunities, a choice of transport and resiliency, and underpinned by value for money and environment issues, such as the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. In relation to resilience, as a country, New Zealand has a strong focus on resilience. As for much of the developed world, climate change and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions are top of mind. We also have 2 other themes relating to resilience: earthquake preparedness and readiness for recovery, and social resilience, also referred to as well-being. In relation to climate change, we are due to have legislation known as the Zero Carbon Bill being introduced to Parliament in the next few months. Reduction of emissions is one of the drivers towards more focus on public transport, walking and cycling, and electric vehicles. There's also a lot of talk about the need to plan for sea level rise and increased flooding, a wetter future. But it is politically very difficult for local authorities to raise the issues, let alone make commitments regarding any future potential need to move or even abandon existing infrastructure that is in a coastal location. Work is happening in various places regarding, for example, making alternative transport routes available, where there's a current reliance on a single route that is in a threatened location, say along the coast. Because of the nature of New Zealand's geography, many of our state highways and local routes are in this category. In relation to earthquake preparedness, there's a focus on ensuring buildings are engineered and constructed to withstand earthquakes. Our building standards have been increased in this regard following recent earthquakes. This includes bridges on roads and public transport infrastructure, as well as standalone buildings. Increasing emphasis is being placed on earthquake risk and the ability to recover if an earthquake was to occur. Again, ensuring alternative transport routes are available in this context comes up, as well as in respect of climate change. In relation to the social aspects of resilience or wellbeing, the government is to adopt its first wellbeing budget this year, which has been developed bearing in mind its focus on improving the wellbeing of New Zealanders. This theme is relevant to the infrastructure sector in relation to the increasing need for more skilled workers to deliver planned projects. The skills shortage is in all aspects of construction: engineers, tradespeople, right across the board. We are seeing some contracts requiring or incentivising local employment and training for new employees. This is a great initiative, and I think we should see more of that. We are also seeing the road corridor increasingly being described not just as a road corridor, but as public open space, where a range of activities can take place and should be provided for. For example, enhancing the ability for people to gather in some of these spaces. Turning to productivity. There are 2 particular themes relevant to productivity that are topical in the New Zealand transport sector at present: collaboration and data. For collaboration, it is becoming more commonplace to see organisations working together to deliver transport outcomes. Traditionally, it may have been a local authority contracting 2 or more construction companies, each maintaining a part of their local roading network. We now have several examples where the road controlling authorities, design consultants and contractors are all working together to deliver project outcomes. Some of these are structured as formal alliances, but other structures also exist. Let's Get Wellington Moving is a multi-agency project in the planning stage, involving Wellington City Council, Greater Wellington Regional Council and NZTA, as well as several consultancies. With potential changes to state highway and local roads, as well as the possible introduction of light rail to assist the flow of traffic through from the Wellington railway station to the airport, if this project moves to delivery, it will be something that's likely to soak up almost all of the capacity in the consultancy market during the design phase. Collaboration is going to be required to ensure resources are available to deliver other work in the Wellington region and beyond during that period of time. We're also seeing in New Zealand collaboration in other sectors as well. We have a big focus on fresh water at the moment, And in this area, there's a lot of collaboration going on between the Ministry for the Environment, the Ministry for Primary Industries, regional councils, farmers, all land users across the spectrum towards ensuring fresh water quality in our catchments. And in relation to data, as we know, there's data everywhere. The New Zealand metadata standards for transport, water and building infrastructure have been developed and are slowly being adopted. Currently this is voluntary. NZTA has recently commenced a project to get the roading asset management data standards up and running. A key part of this project involves working with the sector to roll out and embed the standards. To that end, IPWEA is working with NZTA and the broader sector to help design the best implementation plan. A key focus of this work is providing a national approach with regional variations. This menu of options thinking is important for responding to local funding and resourcing challenges as the sector responds to a nationwide maturing of asset management practices. A lot of information is collected relating to the use of transport networks through vehicles providing public transport, smart signs and other smart city type infrastructure. Real-time information is provided to the public to enable route planning, and harnessing this data in the longer term will enable better planning of transport systems. The digital revolution is coming to public works. It's great for IPWEA to be supporting its members and working with sector leaders and stakeholders to support the sector to meet these future challenges. So I've talked a bit about productivity and resilience in sort of a general sense, and now I want to talk more specifically. New Zealand has a high reliance on exports, so transport of goods to ports and airports to enable them to get offshore is really important to our economy. Improvement of the state highway network in particular, through the Roads of National Significance program I mentioned earlier, was an initiative of the previous government to improve freight movement. At the same time, several of the port companies have established inland ports, hubs in regional locations where goods can be transferred to containers for easier transport to the port, whether by road or rail. Some ports have also joined forces, with the smaller port playing a feeder role to the larger port, rather than receiving international shipping traffic direct. These initiatives are market-driven. While many ports are majority owned by public sector organisations, usually regional councils, as I mentioned before, they don't receive public funding, unlike the road and rail networks. There are some roading improvements in some regional areas that are specifically focused on enabling delivery of goods to market and stimulating those markets. And the transport sector is also improving productivity in New Zealand through its international connections. We have more international companies established in New Zealand now, providing competition in a more global market. And also, partly as a result of that, but partly separately, more workers coming to New Zealand from international locations and applying their skills and improving capacity in the market. I just want to talk a little bit about more resilient transport systems with a particular focus on earthquake recovery. I'm going to start with the more recent of our two significant earthquakes, the Kaikoura earthquake, which happened in November 2016. It was a 7.8 magnitude quake. It was centred near Kaikoura, which is on the east coast of the South Island, about halfway between Picton and Christchurch. If you're not sure about the geography of New Zealand, we have a North Island and a South Island. The South Island, the main State Highway 1, runs down the coast from Picton all the way down to Invercargill. Christchurch is about halfway down. It's a key transport route. The Kaikoura earthquake caused 1 million cubic metres of material to fall onto the road corridor and the rail line. It closed both State Highway 1 and the rail link between Picton and Christchurch, and also many inland roads. Many communities were isolated, unable to be reached by road for several weeks. Just as an example of the impact, the army had to be deployed to rescue some of the people who were stranded along the roading corridor as a result of the earthquake. And if you Google NZTA Kaikoura earthquake recovery, There's some more information about that and also some amazing pictures of what impact the earthquake had. The recovery work relating to the transport corridor was dealt with by the establishment of the North Canterbury Transport Infrastructure Recovery Alliance, NCTIR, called NECTA. This was a collaboration between NZTA and KiwiRail, the owners of the road and rail infrastructure, and construction companies Downer, Fulton Hogan, Heb Construction and Higgins. NECTA's job was to restore the road and rail networks and the harbour at Kaikoura. 1 year, 1 month and 1 day after the earthquake, the road and rail were reopened to traffic. It was quite an achievement given the scale of destruction. 1,700 people were employed in this monumental task, which it was termed Connecting Communities. And it has had the result of connecting communities in more than the infrastructure sense, with the local business community banding together to provide catering and other services for the workforce that was located there, and with many local people being employed in the alliance. So, more resilient transport systems are those that do more than enable the movement of freight. We've had stark experiences to bring us to the realisation that connection of communities is a critical role of transport systems. So the impact of the Kaikoura earthquake was landslides. This is quite a different thing from what happened in the 2011 Christchurch or Canterbury earthquake, where liquefaction was the result. The Canterbury earthquake was a magnitude 6.2 quake. Now, Christchurch is New Zealand's third largest city. The quake was had a lot of damage caused in the centre of Christchurch. And there was major destruction of buildings, both residential and commercial. Iconic buildings like the Christchurch Cathedral was destroyed, and 185 people lost their lives. There was significant damage to underground infrastructure and roads. Half of the district's 2,000 kilometres of sealed roads were damaged. To tackle the rebuild tasks, the Stronger Christchurch Infrastructure Rebuild Team, or SCIRT, was established. Again, this was an alliance-type arrangement entered into by the Christchurch City Council, NZTA, the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority, and construction firms McConnell Dowell, Downer, Fulton Hogan and CityCare. The scope of this alliance was wider than roading. It included the water infrastructure, and that was its initial focus, to get water supplies back up and running for the people of Christchurch. It then went on to roading, and although the alliance itself is finished, there is still roading work to be done. While the roading network in Christchurch was obviously damaged by the earthquake, there were other impacts on the transport network. Many businesses had to move out of the central city. It was no longer able to be lived in or worked in. And so there were changes to the bus network and also a lot more cycling. People were cycling a lot more. Christchurch is a very flat city. There is now an increased investment in cycleways in Christchurch. Another outcome of the earthquakes in Canterbury is that there's areas of the city which are now uninhabitable, known as the red zone. In some of those areas, the roading infrastructure does remain, and some of those areas are being used to trial new technologies. And not directly related to that, but related to the uptake of new technology. At Christchurch Airport, there are now autonomous vehicles in operation. So some of the lessons learned from earthquakes in New Zealand are that working together in an alliance-type model can achieve amazing results. The NECTA Alliance, following the Kaikoura earthquake, is a fantastic example of this. We need to ensure that we have viable alternative routes, that we're not reliant on a single route, especially where the main route is at high risk of seismic activity or climate change impact. And as I mentioned, State Highway 1 is coastal in many parts. And finally, a focus on community and the role of the road corridor as more than just a road corridor, as public open space. It's being taken into account in some of the design of the Christchurch transport network following the earthquakes. So just as a way of final comment, in New Zealand, transport is being used to improve productivity through collaboration, improving use and harnessing of data, and with international connections and influence. From the earthquakes we have lived through, we have learnt the importance of alternative, resilient routes and the power of collaboration through alliances to restore connections. We need to encourage people to continue to work in the infrastructure sector and provide training and education to upskill the workforce. So I just say there's a lot going on down here. I hope you can join us for some collaboration soon.